Just 1 month prior, the grizzled old detective celebrated his 13th year on the force. In the 3 decades he had been working homicide, the veteran lawman investigated cases and arrested people for crimes that he'd never even fathomed possible. At least, not until he had to write and deliver a 15-page report encasing the horrendous details of gruesome murders to his boss's desk. It was the kind of job where every morning as he headed out the house, a cup of coffee in his hand and a folded up newspaper under his arm, he prayed that work would be as dull and mundane as possible. Those were the good days. The ones where nothing of importance happened, and he could get home before his wife fell asleep so the two of them could drink tea and watch old episodes of Seinfeld on the couch together. This would not be one of those days. To any civilian spectator, the scene would resemble that of absolute chaos. Ambulances and police cars were parked every which way all along the street, facing off in arbitrary directions. A small army of officers formed a human wall around the area, doing their best to hold off and mitigate the ever-growing crowd. Further down the block, a cluster of news vans had assembled, each with a well-coiffed reporter beside it, covering the spectacle as more and more details continued to leak. The detective ducked under a ribbon of police tape and made his way towards the group of EMTs, attending to a man on a stretcher. He flashed the badge to the paramedics and they stepped aside, giving him a clear path to the patient. Mr. Charles Hopple. The man had been casually chatting with the female paramedic, holding a pack of ice to the side of his head. He turned an inquisitive eye towards the detective. "Yes, that's me." "Mr. Hopple, I'm with the police department. Would you care to explain what happened here tonight?" "Oh, why certainly, officer. My wife Marcy and I had just sat down to dinner and..." The detective raised an eyebrow. "Dinner?" "Yes, we were having dinner," Charles repeated with agitation in his eye, seemingly annoyed over having just been interrupted. "A delicious meal, too, I might add. We weren't more than a couple bites in, when he crashed through our front door like a madman." "When who crashed through the door, Mr. Hopple?" "The lunatic! The screwball! The psychopath! Who do you think I'm talking about? Now if you could please stop butting in, officer, I'd like to continue. This whole incident has been very traumatic for me. Please, just let me finish." The detective turned his gaze from the man and looked up into the night sky. Though the constellations were slightly dimmed by the city's lights, he was still able to make out a few of them. The stars had always been a source of comfort for him. They reminded him of all the evenings he spent with his father as a boy, talking on the roof of his childhood home, while watching the universe's cosmic dance unfold before him. He took a slow, deep exhale, then focused his eyes back to the man on the stretcher. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hopple. Please continue." "Right. Well, you should have seen him. His eyes were crazed like he'd just escaped from the loony bin. The nutjob screamed at the top of his lungs and rushed at us while we were still sitting at our dinner table." Mr. Hopple waved his arms around wildly, recreating the madness. "It was all very terrifying. I tried to stop him. The man is built like a linebacker, and as you can see, I've always been told I'm quite wiry." "Crazed, huh?" Charles swatted at the ice pack with his hand, shooing the paramedic away as though she were some bothersome child. "Indeed. The man was a certifiable maniac tonight. He threw me against the wall. That's how I hurt my head, see? I think I may be concussed. It was horrifying to watch him in action, tears streaming down his cheeks while he pummeled my poor wife repeatedly over and over again in the face. She's on her way to St. John's uptown. The EMT I talked to said she probably won't need reconstructive surgery." "Oh, thank heaven. You've no idea how relieved I am to hear that. For once, Detective, I'm actually glad you cut me off. Now, where was I? Oh, right. Once he finished with her, he turned to me. He pinned me to the ground and snatched the carving knife off the dinner table. Hopple lifted his arm overhead like a wide-eyed Hitchcockian villain about to dispatch a throwaway character. My goodness, he was strong! He held me by the throat, screaming at the top of his lungs, droning on and on about how he was going to make my wife and I suffer. That's when the police arrived. Just in time, I might add. Took a couple of your boys in blue to subdue him, but they brought him down. Score one for the good guys, eh? Hopple nudged the detective with his elbow, and gave him a playful wink. Honestly, though, I have no idea what would drive a man to act so insane. No idea, huh? The detective reached up to remove the withered hat sitting atop his gray, thinning hair, which he had then ran his fingers through, stopping at the back of his neck to massage away the tension. 30 years. For 30 years, he had been working homicide in this city. For 30 years, he had always prided himself on his ability to stay composed and act in a professional manner, no matter what the circumstances. For 30 years, the old man had headed up cases that ran the gauntlet from strange and unorthodox to downright sick and depraved. In all that time, no matter how appalling, how offensive he found a particular crime to be, he had always remained cool, calm, and collected. The detective felt his heart pounding emphatically inside his chest. His mouth had gone dry. He tried frantically to rein in his breathing, but couldn't prevent his lungs from drawing in and expelling air at a frenzied pace. 30 years. For 30 years, he had been able to keep his emotions at bay while doing his job. But everyone has a breaking point. You really have no idea! He grabbed onto the side of the man's stretcher and flipped it over, sending him tumbling down to the ground. Charles let out a whelp and cradled his hands over his head in a feeble attempt to protect himself. The old detective stormed towards the cowering man, snatched hold of his collar, dragged him to his feet, and shook him violently against the side of the ambulance. Well, for starters, how about the fact that you and your sick wife were eating his infant son for dinner?